Welcome to the Introduction to Entrepreneurial Strategy. The ads you just watched were from two startup firms that emerged in the late 1990s during the dot-com era. One of them was Webvan, the other was Peapod. Now you saw their ads and you see that they are in the same space with the same idea of using the internet to order groceries online and have them delivered to people, rather than the traditional means of going down to the store. Webvan was aimed at disrupting the traditional new supermarket retailers with a whole new value chain. In other words, they weren't simply using it as a means of interfacing between the supermarket and the consumer, but instead were going to build out their whole new distribution chain and distribution network that if an order came in, they would deliver it from those warehouses directly to consumers. Peapod, on the other hand, was directed at that space between the supermarket and the consumer. They were providing this online ordering and delivery and using existing supermarkets as the grocery supplier. Now you know that there is a more recent instantiation of that model in the form of Instacart. But Peapod did it first. What's interesting about these two companies is that they had significant access to resources and they were trying to exploit the same opportunity, that is, online grocery shopping and delivery, at the same time. But their strategies were fundamentally different. What happened? Well, Webvan burned through $1 billion and went bankrupt less than 2 years after its IPO. Peapod, on the other hand, established a partnership with Ahold, who owned the successful Stop and Shop chain in the United States, and that chain ultimately acquired majority ownership in Peapod. Peapod operates as a subdivision of that supermarket chain to this very day. Now, the differences between the two were quite marked. Webvan, in fact, attracted the most investment money, much more than Peapod. And so if you think about that, the market at the time believed that Webvan was the better prospect. But ultimately, Webvan did not succeed because it was unable to deliver groceries at a lower price point than would be the case for traditional grocery retailers. That's what it wanted to do. It wanted to cut out all of this physical retail infrastructure, and have something that was ultimately cheaper. It couldn't do that, or it couldn't get the scale to do that. By contrast, Peapod were working with traditional supermarkets. They weren't seeking to displace them at all. And moreover, if you look at those advertisements, you can see that customers being targeted by Peapod were primarily working, time-poor individuals. In this case, actually, usually working women. These were people who were willing to pay a premium for what Peapod had to offer. Didn't require a discount at all. And so, in this case, Peapod succeeded. The message here is the challenge of innovation-based entrepreneurship is not only about coming up with great ideas, but is choosing how to implement that idea in a way that creates and captures value. This is the entrepreneurial strategy challenge. Our focus will be on how different strategies employed by different startups can both create and capture value. Create value in that the idea ends up bringing some value somewhere to consumers or somewhere else in the value chain, and capture to ensure that a sufficient amount of that value actually is returned to the entrepreneur and their investors to justify all that in the first place. To give you an example of why this is a difficult challenge, let me give you the story of these two individuals. On the right is Dan Bricklin. On the left is Bob Frankston. They may not be sort of household names for entrepreneurship, but they did create something that is so embedded in your lives that their impact on value created is second to none. Dan Bricklin was an MBA student at Harvard Business School in the 1970s. And he was doing a lot of those cases you may be familiar with, Harvard Business School cases. These cases required you often to delve into tables of financials and other things like that, and to examine them and to think about what might happen in different scenarios. Bricklin thought that was quite a laborious task, because what he wanted to do was to change different numbers in different scenarios and ultimately use that to be able to understand better what was happening in those businesses. And that is essentially what he did. He developed a computer program that allowed him to put in those numbers, and without having to recalculate or manually everything every time, if he changed a number, it would automatically do so. Now that program looked like this. You'll recognize it because it looks exactly like the modern spreadsheet. But it was Bricklin who invented it. He laid out data, numbers, labels, etc. in this familiar numeric row and alphanumeric column characteristic, with each individual cell being a distinct unit and operations being able to be done on those cells. This is not Excel. This is VisiCalc. It is what Steve Wozniak, a co-founder of Apple, claimed was the first killer application for personal computers. So why haven't you heard of them? Well, your short answer may be, well, I guess all this went to Microsoft. But that is really just the end state. What happened was that Bricklin and Frankston tried to do a deal with some other companies to help with marketing, etc. For reasons that I'm not going to go into here, those had various complications. And one of the complications is that they weren't able to adjust enough to keep key employees in. Employees like this person, Mitch Kapoor. Mitch Kapoor was working for VisiCalc on the spreadsheet and wanted to do additional changes and things like that. It didn't work out. He left and he ended up founding his own company. That company was called Lotus 123. Lotus 123 was the successor to VisiCalc and really took the entire spreadsheet to the full enterprise environment. Mitch Kapoor has a star of appreciation in MIT's Kendall Square. Others do not. That's the difference between creating value and capturing value. It also illustrates another thing that we're going to talk about here, the paradox of entrepreneurship. The paradox of entrepreneurship arises because going to market requires you to get market knowledge, to understand what the market wants, and also to engage in experimentation to improve your products and to get what is called product market fit. But the problem with that is that when you do those things, you are necessarily involving others, and you might be doing things very, very publicly or with other firms, etc. And each time you do that, you lose some control over your innovation. That loss of control, undermines your ability to capture value. So you have this issue. Creating value requires you to gain market knowledge and engage in market experimentation, but these things fundamentally start to limit the value you can capture. This is something that VisiCalc found out. What some firms do is, of course, the opposite. And what they do is engage in very, very high secrecy. Now, this gives them a lot of control over their innovations, but it fundamentally limits their ability to learn from the market environment, and any other people they need to interact with. A story for that is this: the Segway. Segway was launched around the turn of the millennium, and it was a truly magical device. But it was launched fully formed with a huge factory set up to make thousands of these things a week. However, it was done under a cloak of secrecy, and as a result, they were unable to engage in crucial market testing to see whether people would really want to buy this product. Sure, it was cool driving around on the factory floor, but when you were out in public driving one of these, you stood out like a sore thumb. That was the problem. The secrecy did not allow them to discover that. Millions of dollars were invested, and Segway itself did not succeed as a product. Entrepreneurial strategy is about choosing amongst alternative visions for an idea in a company so that you can manage the paradox of entrepreneurship and manage to both create value and capture value to the greatest degree possible. Such things get talked about by successful entrepreneurs. There's a lot of discussions of paths to success. One set of entrepreneurs emphasizes action. This comes under the blue ocean strategy, the lean startup, and disruption. The notion here is there's too much to worry about. There's too much uncertainty. You can't spend your time pontificating about what you should do. You should just go and do it. Others, most notably within MBA degrees, emphasize planning. This involves carefully examining your environment, the competitive landscape, who has what in order to bring your product to market, and how do you need to marshal those resources, and to plan that out carefully before going into action. Well, the benefits of that are clear. You can reduce a lot of uncertainty. You can avoid major mistakes. The cost is exactly what the people who favor action emphasize. This could take a long time, and you could lose your shot. Both of these approaches really apply only under specific situations. An action-oriented approach is a good idea when there is only really one path forward. If there's only one path to achieve something, you may as well pursue it and not think too much about whether there are other paths. Planning, on the other hand, involves a careful examination of the costs and benefits of alternative paths and choosing the paths with the highest benefit-to-cost ratio. So who wants action?
The main thing is if you have a good idea for a business, as I say, screw it, just do it and give it a go. And you may fall flat on your face, but pick yourself up and keep trying until you succeed.
Richard Branson is, of course, a successful entrepreneur, and many successful entrepreneurs extol the benefits of their approach in advocating that as being the right thing to do for others. So if Richard Branson just did it and that worked out for him, maybe that should work out for everybody. What all this highlights is a disconnect between theory and practice. Basically, if you're looking to become an entrepreneur, then don't waste your time going to university or business school, just get on and do it. That's what many entrepreneurs say. At business schools, it's not surprising. Yeah, it's a waste of time because you're doing something completely opposite to just doing it. You're evaluating and considering and planning, etc. Obviously, where are we going with this? There's right on both sides. The idea of just leaping in blindly into any entrepreneurial venture, that's just rolling the dice, glorified gambling. The idea of trying to get defined costs and benefits when there's so much uncertainty going on and there's so many factors to consider could leave you doing that forever and not getting anything done. What we want to find is a balance between the two. We want to find a way of connecting theory and practice together in a way that for most entrepreneurs will lead to better formulations of entrepreneurial strategy. That's what this course is all about. Entrepreneurial strategy is going to bridge this divide. The key to this is to understand the role of choice in startup decision making. Believe it or not, choice is not something that gets emphasized nearly enough in business school. Business schools often say, there's no real choice once you evaluate things. There's one optimal path. Action-oriented entrepreneurs also don't emphasize choice. They say, don't sit there deliberating. You have no choice. Just do it. In reality, there are choices. And in fact, you have to do enough planning and investigation to earn the right to choose. But you will eventually have to make a choice.